In one of the early canyon photographs, the wall does not look eroded at all. It looks processed. A sheer, red face rises out of shadow in stacked bands, broken by long, horizontal benches, so even they read like platforms, not accidents. Above them, pale layers sit in clean courses, as if the mountain had been opened with intent. Then the eye finds the smaller details: rows of dark cavities, narrow ledges with improbable continuity, abrupt vertical planes where the rock seems less torn apart than cut back. This is the Grand Canyon, the most familiar natural abyss in America, and yet in certain photographs it stops behaving like scenery. It begins to resemble an exposed work face, a quarry on a continental scale. And once that impression appears, it becomes difficult to put away. What exactly are we looking at? The official explanation arrives quickly, and on its face, it is powerful. The National Park Service describes the canyon through a simple sequence: deposition, uplift, downcutting, erosion. Layer upon layer of sedimentary rock was laid down over immense spans of time. The plateau rose. The Colorado River cut downward. Tributaries widened the void. Harder layers held as cliffs. Softer layers weathered into slopes and terraces. Geologists point out that horizontal striations appear across most of the canyon because the rock was deposited in flat beds. Nearly 40 identified layers can be traced through much of the canyon's 277-mile length. In that account, what looks engineered is only stratigraphy exposed by water, gravity, and time. It is a coherent explanation. It is also the explanation almost everyone receives before they ever look closely. But there is a difference between an explanation that accounts for the canyon in general and one that satisfies every feature in particular. Some walls do not merely show layers, they show lateral truncation so clean it reads as removal. Some benches hold their level across distances that look less like collapse than sequencing. Some enlarged images reveal evenly spaced dark punctures along lines of weakness that, to some observers, resemble boreholes or test cuts far more than random weathering pits. There are cliff faces that look stepped in a way naturalists call differential erosion and engineers would call staged extraction. There are roots, platforms, ledges, and voids that seem strangely ready for use. The official explanation is not wrong, but in places it feels incomplete, because it describes how a canyon can form while leaving open the question of whether parts of this canyon were later modified, exploited, or formalized by industry on a scale now underestimated. That is the hidden theory worth treating seriously, not the cartoon claim that human beings dug the entire Grand Canyon with forgotten machines. Not a wild rant about an impossible civilization carving Arizona by hand. The narrower theory is both more sober and more unsettling. That sections of the canyon wall may preserve the signature of industrial quarrying or large-scale extraction imposed onto an older natural landscape, and that over time those signatures were absorbed into the category of geology. In other words, the canyon may not be a choice between nature and industry. It may be both. A pre-existing chasm, rich in seams, cliffs, and exposed strata, later entered by miners, surveyors, builders, and extraction systems, whose traces became visually indistinguishable from the stone around them. What matters is not whether every ledge is artificial. What matters is whether some of the features people casually dismiss as just erosion may belong to a forgotten layer of industrial history. The first reason that possibility survives is measurement. The Grand Canyon's architecture is already seam-like. Hard rock forms cliffs, soft rock forms slopes. The Tonto platform spreads out as a broad bench. The esplanade appears as another immense shelf. The red wall rises in bold vertical mass. The coconino stands pale and resistant near the top. Geology says this step-like form is natural, and in the large sense it is. But quarrying does not fight bedding planes, it follows them. Extraction becomes cheaper when stone already breaks in coherent courses, when a cliff already offers exposed faces, and when the seam is visible for miles. Seen that way, the canyon is not the opposite of a quarry. It is the ideal host for one. A quarry works with grain, fracture, and access. So does water. So does gravity. The visual overlap is the entire problem. If an industrial operation ever used these exposed layers as work faces, later observers would inherit an impossible task, separating ancient erosion from later cutting, when both obey the same structural logic. The stone remembers, but it does not label the phases. The second line of evidence comes from maps and claims, because the record shows the canyon was never simply a passive wilderness waiting to be admired. By the late 19th century, mining claims spread along rims, mesas, creeks, and interior routes. The names remain: Orphan, Last Chance, Copper, Silver Bell. These are not poetic names attached afterward by tourists. They are the legal language of extraction. They indicate ownership, expectation, survey, and planned removal. Trails now treated as scenic descents often began as access corridors to claims. Bright Angel, Grand View, Hermit, and other routes were tied directly or indirectly to mineral ambitions. When a modern visitor sees a dramatic trail cut into a wall, the interpretation arrives pre-packaged as recreation. But many of these paths were first justified by ore, not scenery. The canyon's interior was entered, crossed, and exploited because the stone itself had value. Once that is accepted, the visual field changes. A ledge is no longer only a ledge. It may also have been a haul route. A notch may be more than collapse. It may be the remnant of access. The landscape looks different when paper claims and physical walls are read together. Then there is the engineering. And engineering has a way of ending vague debates. At Orphan Mine, roughly 1,000 feet below Maricopa Point, miners did not merely scratch at the rim. They built 2 trails to the claim. One route involved ropes, ladders, and toe holds chiseled into the cliff. Later, an 1,800-foot cable tram carried material and men. In 1959, that tram was replaced by a system centered on a 1,500-foot vertical shaft drilled straight down from the rim to the mine site below. At Grandview, historical records describe drifts driven directly into the face of the red wall, with crosscuts branching from them, the 2 main levels about 100 feet apart vertically. Ore was raised by mule-operated hoist. Waste rock was dumped into the canyon from the lower drift. A narrow-gauge track served one level. Pick, shovel, and explosives were used where needed. This is not speculation. It is documented practice. The canyon walls were technically workable. The cliffs were entered. The faces were modified. Material moved through these voids by systems precise enough to require shafts, tramways, cut trails, and planned dumping. Once that is admitted, the phrase industrial quarry no longer sounds absurd. It sounds like a question of scale, distribution, and forgotten context. Old photographs deepen the unease because photographs freeze the canyon before restoration, before interpretive smoothing, before dangerous remnants were removed or ignored. A head frame disappears, and later the site reads as untouched stone. A ladder comes out, and the route becomes a curiosity. A shaft is sealed for safety, and the visible landscape heals into geology. This is not deception in the dramatic sense. It is how landscapes are cleaned. It is how categories harden. In early records, cliff face access, hoists, adits, Cribbed trail segments, chiseled holds, and suspended transport systems appear as functional details. In later public memory, the same canyon is presented mainly as sublime nature, with a few footnotes about hardy prospectors. But photographs do not always cooperate with that simplification. Some show stark plains and benches that look more ordered than the summary permits. Some capture roots and cuts so embedded in rock, color, and shadow that once the attached machinery is gone, a later viewer may not know what he is seeing. The record is still there. The difficulty is that the surviving evidence is visually ambiguous, and ambiguity is where forgotten histories hide. A fair reading has to pause here, because the mainstream geological explanation deserves more than a shrug. Differential erosion is real. Hard limestone, sandstone, and dolomite do hold as cliffs, while weaker shale and mudstone break down into slopes and shelves. Jointing creates vertical weakness. Freeze-thaw widens cracks. Debris flows clear faces and build fans. Water can produce surfaces that look astonishingly sharp, and sedimentary rock naturally creates horizontal bands so straight they seem drawn. Any serious investigation has to accept that most of the Grand Canyon is exactly what geologists say it is: a natural landform carved by river incision, tributary erosion, uplift, weather, and time. But that still leaves an important remainder. Geology explains why the canyon exists. It does not automatically explain every local regularity that resembles industrial modification. It does not tell us, simply by being true in the large, that every suspiciously planar face, every patterned cavity, every improbable ledge, every blasted tunnel, and every cliffside access feature must also be entirely natural. The question is not nature or industry. The question is whether industry may have overprinted nature in ways later viewers no longer separate. And the pattern does not disappear when the focus widens beyond a single wall or a single mine. Along Havasu Creek and around Mooney Falls, tunnels, iron spikes, chains, ladder systems, and prospecting traces survive in and around travertine and cliff formations. Historical accounts argue over which openings were natural caves and which were enlarged or blasted by miners, but the hybrid result is the point. Natural voids became industrial passage. Industrial cuts adopted the appearance of natural stone. Elsewhere across the wider canyon country and the Colorado Plateau, vast stair-stepped escarpments, mesa edges, amphitheaters, exposed seams, and abrupt benches repeat at continental scale. No, that does not mean the whole region was one giant quarry. But it does mean the physical grammar required for quarrying is everywhere present. Exposed courses, fracture-controlled faces, gravity-assisted drops, and high-value mineral seams revealed by erosion before any large excavation had to begin. Once the landscape itself behaves like pre-opened infrastructure, the threshold for industrial use drops sharply. The same setting that makes the canyon geologically spectacular also makes it unusually susceptible to being worked, entered, and visually confused with the processes that formed it. There is also a quieter explanation for how such a possibility could vanish without any grand conspiracy. It may have disappeared through classification. Geologists study strata. Historians study tourism, settlement, and policy. Mining specialists study claims, production, and ore grades. Park managers study safety and restoration. Each discipline sees the same cliffs through a different filing system. A ledge described in a geological column as a resistant unit may also have served as a haul road. A void listed by a mining historian as a drift may appear in later public memory as just another dark opening in the canyon wall. Dangerous structures are removed. Access routes are decommissioned. Rust decays. Wood collapses. Newspaper claims dissolve into archives. The landscape is then reintroduced to the public under a cleaner story. Not false, just narrower. Bureaucracy does not need to hide a thing in order to misplace it. Inertia is enough. Economics is enough. Once a site becomes an icon of deep time, every scar on it is more likely to be explained as ancient than recent, more likely to be folded into natural history than separated out as industrial archaeology. That helps explain another contradiction: the mismatch between the scale of some visible features and the small-scale language often used in the historical record. Grand View operations were described as modest. Prospecting shafts around Havasu often led nowhere economic. Many canyon mines failed or produced only intermittently. Yet the infrastructure built to reach them could be elaborate. Drifts in cliff faces, crosscuts, tramways, vertical shafts, hoists, ladders, blasted passages, and engineered trails clinging to stone. Small output does not mean small intervention. In difficult terrain, even a limited operation can leave marks out of proportion to its profits. And once those marks lose their machines, they become strangely anonymous. A drill line without the drill is only a line of holes. A working bench without rails is only a terrace. A transport route without cables is only a ledge. What changed was the explanation. The underlying fabric remained. The canyon kept the cuts, but not the labels. That is one reason the Quarry reading feels so persistent in certain images. It is not that the evidence is overwhelming. It is that it is structurally plausible, materially documented in part, and visually easy to misclassify once separated from its apparatus. So the unsettling possibility is not that the Grand Canyon is fake. It is that the canyon may contain more layers of history than the common story allows. Geological time at the base, industrial time laid over it in select zones, survey time, mining time, restoration time. Memory compresses these together until only the oldest layer seems real. That is why some walls can look impossible. They are being read through the wrong scale. A geologist sees epochs. A miner sees a seam. An engineer sees access, load, and fracture. A bureaucrat sees jurisdiction. A tourist sees beauty. The cliff does not choose between those readings. It holds all of them at once. There is nothing irrational about asking whether certain perfect drill marks, certain planar walls, certain benches, and certain routes belong partly to an industrial phase now visually absorbed into the natural monument around it. Hidden history often survives this way. Not as a secret in a locked room, but as the wrong label attached to an object everyone can see. And that brings the argument back to the opening image. If a canyon wall can look like a quarry face, that may mean nothing. Or it may mean that we are staring at a mixed landscape and insisting on a pure explanation because purity is easier to teach. The accepted story of river erosion is real. The mining history is real. The surviving engineering is real. The archival photographs are real. The legal claims were real. The shafts, drifts, ladders, trams, and chiseled holds were real. The only part still treated as unworthy of serious synthesis is the possibility that these facts belong together more closely than we have been told. The pattern repeats. A monumental natural setting acquires industrial use. The industrial use fades. The site is reclassified as scenery. Later viewers notice geometric scars and are told they are imagining things. Sometimes they are, but not always. The real question is not whether the theory sounds strange, but whether anyone with the tools to verify it has seriously looked. Not glanced at a photograph and laughed, not repeated the standard timeline and moved on. Looked. Compare old images to present walls. Mapped claim records against visible benches, studied suspicious cavities as possible bore patterns, rather than dismissing them in advance. Traced, vanished tramways, sealed shafts, cut ledges, and cliffside drifts back into the stone. If the answer is no, then the theory remains alive for a simple reason. The canyon is full of evidence that belongs to more than one history at once, and the record, even now, has not been read all the way through.